chair takes, the consensus has been that England were just as shit now as they were in the Six Nations. Yet watching it back, England actually played was balanced from what we saw earlier this year, especially in that crucial area of attack. I speculated a month or so ago about how Marcus Smith and Eric Veltman play off each other, and we saw that start to click in this really promising battle this weekend. We can see it on their first attack of the game. Our first phase, the ball goes through both Smith and Farrell's hands in order to invite Vunipola up to crash it up. But it's on the next phase that we really get to see what this partnership could create. It's an incredible tactician organizer, and it allows him to unlock an extra use of Smith's vision and speed. Because immediately the first receive from Jimmy George on the shoulder, and Smith uses his sheer pace to remain hidden until the last second. Normally, the fly-off is pretty visible. The defense knows where they are, and the task is to work out who they're passing to, what they're going to do. Deception can be used to hide any shots they're going to take. The speed has allowed England to create an extra layer of subterfuge, and it gets Stewart and here. And the next phase, the ball is somewhere in Smith, so carefully watching from the extreme early back, and so it's soft forwards. This is the kind of ball Smith would have called out himself in applications, and to pull some kind of magic bullshit. But instead of tempting and manipulating matters out of the hands, his game has now matured to the point that he recognises this is a phase too soon, and the measure of front football his patience now creates. And England then run the same thing again. Karepi sees this and jumps on it, but England are so unlucky that Marshall reads this so well, because he almost Marshall right through for a break. Things then get scrappy, Farrell and Smith stop to re-strategize, Smith spots the space in the front of the car, and communicates that Farrell is in a better position to take the kick. Stewart contests it well, and England have made an easy 20 metres in, Curry then plays like a little piss boy, shuts this down real well, flying up from the sweep position to pressure Gedge. So, knowing that someone's going to be filling space in the right, Australia are quite happy to drift, but it's behind the line and increases kind of dog leg on Smith notices, figures it's a perfect opportunity to try and isolate David Walker. He flips the inside ball and the two wingers interlink, and this is just a split second longer for Now to better aim his pass away from being tried for March. Kind of the story of the game. England creates opportunities that really starting to click, but the final few percent are still missing. 4 times in the second half, England made it up in the opposition line, only to have it all spoiled by Michael Hooper. This is not dissimilar to the sum total 4 years ago, when the Springboks were disrupting at the breakdown the way nobody in the World Cup could, because the players clearly now just knew their role and knew their patterns 10% better. And it also comes back to a day for any work. Even with 14 men, we can outwork them. The Wallabies were relentless workers, but they were also smart at how they did things, not wanting to waste any of their effort once weighing down. We can see this in the aftermath of England's first try behind again. Their little maul goblin king at the pin. England's sticks ball to target Parecki. Stewart breaks off to take out Bell. Cole at the top. To smash it back and score. So, the next England opportunity, Australia learned from last time. The ball inches towards the sideline, so Parecki joins the ball so that he can't merge. If England break, push them out in touch alongside White. England then just go abandon ship and start to pick and go. Hooper waits for George to be second before ball carrier. Time available before Toja can clear it. He drops the ball past his penalties and doesn't have to be aggressive. Here the Wallabies are happy to stand off and drift and down until England have played enough of their hand that Karepi knows where it's going and can make a huge hit to welcome Tony Care back to international rugby. It was one part of a great game from Karepi, trying to make it better and better. The way the Wallabies was like saying we fly hard was really exciting, and I also want to give kudos to Noah Lolisea. Not only was he absolutely unbelievably rock solid playing 80 after expecting to be on the bench, but the thing I love about him is his willingness to listen. There are a few flyouts out there with as few control-freak tendencies as Lolisea. He plays the pivot position because he wants to get the best out of others around him, rather than to be the focal point of everything. Yet that doesn't mean he can't take control when he sees the best way to unlock a defence. And we see a brilliant mixture of bossing and listening in the crucial try finished by Jordan Pataya. Australia start by getting going. Lolisea senses nothing is on, but Marika Korobente is thinking otherwise, constantly sniffing around the ground looking for a chance. Slipper here sneaks in and takes one of Toja's legs, and it opens up a bit of space for Hooper to pour through and pick. shoulder, but his real target is to take March out of the game and prevent him from behind. He fixes both, but just watch Callaway's line hit sublime. He starts out on the inside ball, times it perfectly, and then can flick the pass brilliantly to Pataya. Goal hanging on the outside of his skills. He crashes through care and over the line to space. Just try that comes from selfless each one back. Racing Mateo's optimism, setting this moment of England essentially numbered up, being a try-scoring chance. Second try finished by kind of team try. Australia know they just need to get toe challenge. Neville essentially tackling and getting to deck. Pataya himself is actually in this role, but just stood off to one side. The idea being he can keep an England forward off to the side, knowing they have a try-scoring threat about. They've got to watch. This doesn't happen, but the moment Australia goes for Toji, several of the England players get taken out as collateral damage on one side, and it opens up the space for England to burst off through to score. This is a Wallaby team who approach this game with bright eyes, full tanks, playing joy and optimism, shown in a fun try for Pete Samu, working things wonderfully as they smash it off the field, very controlled, sensibly, just taking opportunities to make the optimal read. Eventually, resulting in Pete Samu catching them flat-footed, making a slight step and powering through to score. After a 7-year drought against Eddie's Army, seeing Wallabies tick this box and make bizarrely somehow Wales and Scotland now the only team in ages they haven't beaten in the last 4 years. As a neutral, this should be exciting. And whilst the final 2 tries for Aaron will give them a it just serves to set the 2 tests up very nicely. England are still building, they're still getting better, becoming from behind a perfect demonstration of this, a perfect sign for the fans to see what's actually happening here. But if Australia could see it out and take it home, claiming their first series winner for England since 2006, that truly just thank you for watching that. I hope you enjoyed it. That is the Australia England. No, you know that you just watched it. I've also got England Ireland is up on the channel elsewhere. I was hoping to get the first one out time before the test. So I'm just going to kind of roll those into 2 and cover the first 2 tests. I'm really sorry that I'm not going to get to it. I thought I could get through all 3 games. There was enough to talk about in all 3 games. Just it's been down to so yeah, if you want to have a look at the other games that happened last week, there's loads of stuff on the channel. There's podcasts as well. There's loads of stuff around. I appreciate it if you want to look around and nose around, and maybe come back next week when I look at the first 2 tests between Wales and Springboks, and then potentially between USA against Chile on the weekend, 11 PM UK time. I'm really excited about that. Look, we'll have rugby. This video is sponsored by Squarespace, the Antoine Dupont of website builders. We're now 6 years into the year of Major James England boss and 21 years into his international coaching career. And yet, if you asked me to sum up everything we've learned about Rangund's own Tasmanian devil in that time, it would take me just 3 words. He's always himself. The genius tactician hiding behind the cantankerous charm of your school's most divisive chemistry teacher, Jones has been coaching international rugby longer than anyone else in the game, and his CV contains more shock results than Henry's late lateral float collection. And yet, as his England team polished off a decidedly average Six Nations, Jones finds himself in a decidedly familiar vat of hot water. As some of rugby union's most headline-worthy pundits, writers, and non-entities call for Eddie Jones' resignation just 18 months out from the World Cup. Not that they'd have anyone in line to replace it now that Argentina become the first team to break glass and deploy Checker. However, this last month, as I start to reflect on Six Nations and look back over everything we saw, and perhaps more importantly, everything we didn't, I've had a creeping feeling crawling across my entire being, a sickness I couldn't deny, something that made my skin really, really itch. But being a Wales fan is nothing new, so I spoke up with the other thing that made me feel ill to admit. Because from where we're sitting now, admittedly, a hell of a loss that Jamie down on Saint Denis on October 28th, pedantics, but I can't shake the visions. George Furbank is set to retire with a World Cup winners' medal. So I think all of this begs a few questions. After England was so 6 out of 10 in the Six Nations, just what evidence, why anybody got this feeling, and how did it seep into my bones? I've already described Eddie Jones the man, but I've labelled Eddie Jones the international rugby coach in exactly the same way. He's always himself. The Eddie Jones way is rarely conventional, and most occasionally has been to his detriment by other nations and finally, generally, the Eddie Jones way has been the way everyone else playing once they work out why he was doing it, which will always be the invitation he needs to rip everything up and start the process of revolution again a few years later. Jones's career as a head coach began in 1998 when then Brumbies coach and Graham Andrew cosplayers Dominic McQueen was pulled away to take over the Australian national team, leaving his assistant Eddie, who retired from playing just 3 years ago, in charge of the second best club in the Southern Hemisphere. And whilst by his own admission, Jones was out of his depth in that first season. Over the next few years, Jones built the Brumbies into a dominant force. Not only did he lead them to the most successful period in their history, becoming the first team from outside New Zealand to ever win Super Rugby, from a purely playing perspective, Eddie Jones' Brumbies team became arguably the most innovative, influential and important club side in the history of rugby union. A lot of the ideas Jones introduced to Super Rugby in 1999 remain the backbone of international teams' attacks today. In the mid-90s, rucks looked like this. The 95 World Cup, the English team would go through 38 rucks a game, with only around half of the team's carries resulting in a breakdown, and for good reason. Rucks were a free-for-all. Scrum halves forced to wait 10 seconds to see which team's forward punches on the floor, all the others just lob it away and get out of there. Whilst we were just about out of the days of every forward being expected to take a breakdown, I looked over every ruck of Australia's games against Tier 1 teams from the World Cup in 95, and I didn't find a single phase where fewer than 4 forwards committed to a ruck, and generally there's more than that, nor a single one where a single back which, you can imagine, slow things down. No, this is the way playing that. Sounds pretty ideal. The average run speed in that tournament was about 9.4 seconds. Enter Eddie. This is from the Super Rugby semi-final in Eddie's second season. After running a lovely move, dummy runner Pat Howard is looking up and looking out with an imposing jackal front as an assigned part of his role in that play. A few years prior, he didn't throw a single back into a breakdown all World Cup. Then, Jones fakes the outside centre clearing out into the fabric of the street, allowing Regan to play the ball for just 4 seconds, lifting half the average from just 1 year earlier, close to the average today. Eddie Jones' Brumbies basically invented fast ball, whereas some coaches want to see innovation to the end result, but Eddie Jones is only ever presented further opportunity. In 1995, the average attack passed just 7 passes. Teams did not keep hold of the ball for very long. In 1998, Eddie Jones pioneered the free-phase move. These were designed to draw defenders up and away over the first 2 phases so they could run the real strike play the first time around, and they were hugely effective. In order to make sure they secured the ball on each of those phases, Jones gave his forwards set positions amongst the backs, so they always had a unit or 2 on hand to aid the likes of Howard clearing out. Before this, forwards were looked like Tom Cruise in nothing but set pieces and free. Jones has run the field amongst the backs and blended the increase in skill set we've seen today if those played an active role in those strike plays. These moves very often targeted the front this area of the ruck of the force out second and third lines. This became so influential, teams were forced to invent a guard or pillar in reply, 2 terms ubiquitous to anyone who's played rugby at any level since. In short, his Brumbies team were a sensation, and it wasn't long before Jones was asked to as he was asked to replace his old at the top of the scaffolding, promoted to coach the Australian national team, and after back-to-back Bledisloe Loads at the Tri-Nations title, 2003 Eddie Jones catapulted to what will soon be a lifelong obsession, the Rugby World Cup. Australia entered that World Cup as a considering the championship moved on from dark horses, and it finished as second prize. Jones has talked over times about how it took 7 years for him to work out what went wrong and move past it, but thankfully he was able to come to terms with it, thanks to Squarespace. Using its plethora of web features, Jones could easily journal his account of what happened in that World Cup. He could create pages dedicated to all of his battering Romania and Namibia pool stages. He could easily insert videos of them cruising past Argentina or squeezing by Ireland. He could integrate social media functions simply to bring everyone up to date on how they could come to be defeat Scotland or to find out just as Australia did. And all of it could point people towards a shop entirely dedicated to the big one. For years in advance, Plus, Eddie Jones prepped ways to beat the number one team in the world, the All Blacks, in the semi-final. Also, on that website, you could sell t-shirts easily, bearing the infamous words, 4 more years, boys. And then he used the blogging features to create updates on the infamous finalists' incredibly famous extra time play-by-play. And just the Wallabies were 10% off winning the World Cup. You too can save 10% by clicking the link in the description and using the offer code SQUIDRUGBY. It's what Eddie Jones would want. This lit a fire in Eddie, and not just for web design, which I'm sure he's continued since. Seeing his team come so close to fall so late was almost as agonising as knowing he was bettered by Clive Woodward. And this is what... I'm sorry, what was his name again? Stephen John. This is what Stephen Johns forgets. Eddie Jones will always be. Ever since that fateful final, Eddie Jones has cared about nothing, absolutely nothing in the world other than winning the Rugby World Cup. And I think all of this was evident in the 2022 Six Nations. Perhaps the biggest criticism of England this year is how shapeless and floppy they've looked with the ball, which is especially jarring after how well they broke down teams in the autumn. So, the big question is, why? Under new attack coach Martin Gleeson, England have adopted an extremely experimental system that frequently looks like they have no system at all. Now, as I previously alluded to, almost every team in modern international rugby plays some variation on the 1-3-3-1, a tactic that just describes where across the field you play to going forwards. It's a set structure, a formation that informs the kind of width, pace and style your team can play with. The 1-3-2-2 deployed by Japan, whereas Australia is designed to get the most out of the pack. 2-4-2 common in Super Rugby, handling, carrying, or springbok play pattern 2-2-2-2 because there are enormous forwards need less support and suspect forward to best fit how you want to play. This Six Nations, England took this idea of extending up to play what Jones described as positionless, formationless rugby. Of course, teams shifting between formations when they use zone midfield is very common. If you go from 1-3-1 to here as they cross the halfway line, England went one step further and changed it up on a play-by-play basis. We can see a great example of it here. England pressure caused Italy's teenage Niall Varney to panic and throw an interception, and England instantly set into a 1-3-3-1. Smith hits Dombrun, and the positionless idea then really comes into effect. England set their forward shape on the blind side, except all 7 forwards here are backs. Normally, a team was what's known as the boot, and either the forwards would carry or they pass behind the backs to release their wild technical shit. But when it's all backs, Brex has no idea what he's faced with and makes a panic read, allowing England to flood right through. Harry Randall's been running a cheat lane, but goes instead in to secure the ball, knowing speed as Marcus Smith floods the inverse. 7 of 8 forwards on this side have hit tiny forwards, and England adopt a 1-2-2-2-1 formation. Yules and Stewart on Smith's inside to hold the Italian hands, and the running threat of Smith himself momentarily. Now, if England had stuck to the more standard 1-3-3-1, they were only just 8 seconds earlier. Alex Dombrun here is committed to this group and tries a hard line, which allows Padavani to then drift and cover the 2 wide men. Instead, being in a 2 allows Dombrun to run this overs line, meaning he's on the outside and Padavani can't cover George until the pass is thrown. This allows Benjamin George to power down the wing and ride him on his head and finish. England changed formation 3 times in 10 seconds. Regardless of in charge of calling the structure movements will unlock the defence best in each scenario, on each play. This is something he got better at as the tournament went on. Against Scotland, Smith actively blunted England by looking to play more steppy and taking game to the wins. By the time England faced those around 3, was incredibly exceptional, useless managing his own incredibly well to keep England's ball marching forward. However, the moment Smith is off his feet, the moment he gets tackled, he's out of the game. England shape just fell apart. The point of a 1-3-3-1 type structure is to prevent this ever happening, to make sure you have attacking options across the full width of the pitch at all times. But because England's shape is so much braver, whenever Marcus Smith wasn't there to boss things at Six Nations, England's shape, their whole attack, fell apart. It became pointlessly blunt to the extent they just had to admit defeat and keep the ball away. This is being marched backwards by the defence. However, this pain will be greatly eased once England have a secret weapon. The winner of Wigan's most wonderful child in 1998, Owen Farrell. Farrell and Smith at the start have only played 1 game together because of the demolition of Australia. But it gave us a perfect idea of how the pair can act as a foil for each other. The Six Nations structure debacle was doubly frustrating because challenging defenders make grown men look like they were built out of kibbutz is a large part of why Marcus Smith is such an exciting, yet in order to make the attack looks to engage the defence and then play the ball to Marcus Smith, a far more instinctive player. Smith jinks on the outside, the Australian defence recovers and gets him to the ground. In this situation, trouble, shapelessness, attack over, and an incoming competition flag. It's really dancing, but instead, Owen Brown takes control and calls for shape. England set to 1-3 from 1, and he orders two Langley to wide channel. As takes inside, shifting it into a fascinating 1-3-2-1. Realising Australia's defence is heavy to the field, Barrow takes it out by fighting it totally onto the carry. He's part of the pod so that ball is as fast as possible, then calls quick ball to himself. Defence congested here. Barrow knows this dummy run by sure enough to draw his Ouija. The more instinctive play of Smith is what's needed. Two Langley's in the wide channel, understood Alonso Bayliss, and hitting the line late, Stewart. Smith jinx and buys him a second, was forcing him to step in. He hits Stewart, and steps up, just brilliantly to start. If O'Connell makes a different decision, England have freed up Smith to select any of these options here, based on what the Australian defence does. Smith and Barrow combo quickly absolutely. Most intelligent level his management of attack is next level, but perhaps most importantly, also selfless. Smith and Stewart got credit for this job. Barrow masterminded the softening of the Australian defence that allowed Smith to do his thing. The phrase I'll say it again this summer. And here is letting Franks like to flow through a line, as they do the aforementioned Barney here. But whilst you can say many things about Ben Youngs, I have in the past, I believe, a petite teenager without much experience, he is not, and he just calmly jinks gets the ball to his 10. Now, whilst the timing now has changed, Simmons still nails his dummy run and it forces him back to check his charge, meaning the rest of the defence to follow suit and remain aligned somehow, except Dante and Villiers react slightly differently to this change in timing. And Marchand picks a beautiful line between them, Smith wanting the ball right away. But Youngs doesn't hear him, then Laws ignores him like he's a single mother, but it shifts the point of focus really nicely. Slade running a lovely line to give Daly an extra second. He times the ball to Stewart superbly, and then finishes phenomenally well once again. He's really good at this. It's such an efficient attacking set by England, and shows what they can do more for these to start to slot together. In a usual system, this final exchange wouldn't have worked. Laws and George would not have been set this far apart, so given the time to change focus repeatedly like this, I don't think that in the first half of the Six Nations either, they would have scored this. It took a full campaign of getting better to be at this point. But also, it doesn't stop with the fly halves. With Slade here tied up the run, takes over. If this strategy is going to take off long term, we need all that planning to stay It's also entirely possible that the game planning will push you and there's going to be a plan B next year. The autumn, they've had significantly more strike players, moves designed to catch teams out in the first three phases, as Eddie Jones so coveted in his days in Canberra. They're probably already practicing moves at the minute that we won't see until the quarterfinals, because Eddie cares about nothing else. He cares about nothing but winning the World Cup. It's what he cares about, so he lives for. But even when he's trying to win the World Cup, he's still all about shaking it up. After a few years as a consultant at Saracens, Suntory in South Africa, Eddie Jones lined up his second shot when he replaced John Kerwin at the helm of a Japanese side who hadn't won a World Cup match since 1991. Now, I've done a full hour in the past on just how Jones prepared the Bayern miracle. He's had to make the most famous moment in Test history, but this bears some fascinating comparisons to his time in England. 18 months into Fuji, Japan played like a parody of their eventual World Cup selves. Only thinking long term, Jones was so desperate to break old habits, he told players they could only kick the behind the goal line, coax out a new style of rugby. This is just a dramatic example of what happened 3 years ago. Sacrificial lambs didn't know that they lost every single game along the way. It helped prepare his team for the 7 games that really mattered. And something I think, I'm sorry, I forgot his name again. What was it? John Galls. This is something that Stilbert Jonkles has forgotten. It was true of the England team as well. The 2018 tournament might be largely forgotten now, but at the time, that was an even greater disgrace than what Jones produced this year. Much like Martin Gleeson now, in 2018, England had just appointed a new attack coach. And that Six Nations actually affect what they would accomplish 18 months later, even though it eventually led to the finishing 5th in the Six Nations, the worst ever performance. So, in order to showcase just what can change in those 18 months, let's contrast this clip from the 2018 Six Nations and the infamous, incredible Manu Tuilagi try from the semi-final against the Netherlands. England were the line out, defence is scrambling, and the right winger steps inside to stay in the field, playing leading England, setting up a run, almost on exactly the same point on the field. And from there, the setup is extremely similar. A 1-2-2 shape, George Force does here, and Mauro Itoje stood here. But if we check what happens next, 2019's example leads to another break and ultimately a try. 2018's example. So, what changed? It was actually something genuine threat that holds the keeper defenders. In a way, Scott's tackling here are not buffed at all by the ball. England second distributed the boot, granting an extra option. Forwards reset so they can take risks. Several players, not just Ford, leaning into the fact Farrell here finds himself forced to go alone next phase, ultimately isolated and turned over. Instead, England just spread it wide and keep the point of focus pace. So for this kind of question, how did England free up these two bodies? Shaw and Moss entering into 2018 with a necessity thanks to the presence of Scotland's biggest jackal threat, John Barclay. But the reason New Zealand's equivalent, Arnie Surveyor, is not there is because England already took care of it. On first phase, Tuilagi charged at the two centres, taking out both of New Zealand's key organisers. Then next phase, England delivered the target Surveyor. Itoje and Vanpool running on the floor, and won't be about to challenge when the break is made moments later. Wilson then enters contact. No England player except May is even contemplating entering the run, all setting into shape. It's so well rehearsed, they all know their individual role infinitely better than they did in 2018. That's what time can buy you. Watch the way Itoje and Vanpool shoot immediately after pinning Surveyor, and equally how knowing quick ball will be essential. So on to Hill, the rest of the play, man marking Surveyor. England sacrificing an attack to prevent the only jackal threat from getting anywhere near the ball. England had to run passages such as this in 2018 to work out what was wrong and click the final pieces into place with ingenious but tiny strategies. Because it's a truth across his entire career. And Eddie Johnson was the worst season into a place. The attack this Six Nations just gone was heavily flawed, but I think it's only requiring small tweaks that Jones has previously shown he's able to apply in 2019. However, I also think that trying against the All Blacks is relevant for another reason, because in all of these World Cups, Eddie Jones opted one game in particular. Blocked their path to glory. It was the free interview with the best people going to the tournament, and Jones leveled up the tactics that he brought to the Brumbies in order to dismantle the favourites. In 2015, it was the Spring. Jones made his business beat the box. He had tacklebacks with South African players, and he had to start doing analysis on Springboks and their individuals over 2 years before the game. And then in 2019, with headlines like this commonplace, Eddie Jones plotted perhaps the most comprehensive depowering All Black rugby has seen in its history. The current rookies' favourites to win Rugby World Cup 2023 are France. And it was only whilst watching back England's loss to France. A month ago, that the feeling, the theory, the creeping, crawling, horrible sensation began to take a hold of me. Because I think, in the same style as the All Blacks and Springboks before them, Eddie Jones is currently plotting, planning, and scheming a means to knock France out of their own home tournament. If the favoured team won every game over the first few stages of the competition, England was basically a blur in the semi-final, just like both of Eddie Jones' previous encounters with the All Blacks. During the 2021 Six Nations, Eddie Jones was quite upfront about he was hiding his attack back. England wouldn't be playing as he intended in the World Cup until after the Southern British International. This was a quote. And so England played quite a straightforward game, except against France. Against France, England deployed this new game plan that they played in 2022 ahead of time. This is England's first attack of the game, and after Watson carried England's traditional shape essentially disintegrates, becoming a succession of runners into a shape, because that's what worked best before snapping back into a 2-4-2 at Ford's behest. This carriage takes out three French defenders. This clip by Yules meaning Billington can't fold as he'd hope, and Ford waits for Dupont to right before giving the pass. Dupont adjusts, but Farrell draws him and frees May. England then snap into a 1-3-3-1, and this combines pick and goes and carries them up to the line, only to be held up over it. They then run exactly the same tactic 5 minutes later, and it leads to a try for Anthony Watson. Ford calling, masterminding the shape, and eventually delivering the perfect final pass. That first game had the best, the cleanest French defence in almost 3 years of official ends. This clearly told Eddie Jones everything he needed to know. Second half, England then instead played a heavy kicking game for half an hour before snapping back into that effective attack for the last 10 minutes when they needed a winner 4 points down. They then parked it for a full year, and they also parked George Ford, knowing he could operate an attacking system to dismantle England's defence. In his sleep, Jones turned to developing Marcus Smith. Smith had never marshaled an attack like this before this year's Six Nations, but now he's not only experienced, he's extremely capable, having improved game on game. And so, as he began developing, Jones was presented with a dress rehearsal for that hypothetical semi-final. He would play with the same team, the same stadium, never under more pressure, giving him a chance to test out another part of his hypothetical game plan. Now, as I discussed a few times in Six Nations, French have developed a pretty lethal kicking game that opens up opportunities for them to counter-attack by kicking long and encouraging the opposition to get back, slowly pushing them backwards. The idea is to find grass each time to turn the fullback and force hurried kicks with lesser and lesser distance. France have been running this tactic for a while now, but the Grand Slam decider gave us the absolute cleanest, clearest and most efficient example we've seen of this the entire era. The only catch is, it was by England. So, England got deep in their own half, and Smith runs this arcing line outside Slade. France keep none in, but instead Slade just punts the ball deep towards the touchline, and England's chase focuses almost entirely on Jaminet, so he has to rush the reply. Smith, however, can be gathered no problem. It's all the time in the world. He hits it down the middle. Jaminet is lands it just outside. Even his hands is basically waiting for Smith. Jaminet under enormous pressure. He picks it up about 40 metres, and it's really easy for Jack now to get 20 of those with the forwards outshape the defence, the chase, and following up. It normally takes France about 4 or 5 minutes to make this kind of return. England do it. Against France, employed a different kicking game from the rest of the one. France's go-to tactic. Dupont attempts to start back and forth here, but Daly feeds Smith, and the great talent the Philippines never had, creates the kind of magic that explains Eddie Jones' desperation to ready him. George Ford might still be better than England, so never do what Smith does here. The time he gives himself on the ball with these little steps exposes the French chase as essentially a sham, encouraging the break, not a real follow, not real that's the mark where Dupont kicked and also makes the most successful tactic. Okay, after 6 minutes going nowhere, because the attacking problems I mentioned previously, Smith stabs it through for the corner, and Untermatt glides into recovery in frankly quite a beautiful way. Not gonna lie to you guys, this is gorgeous. What can I say? I'm attracted things to look on my life. Untermatt spirals down, just backwards, turn before applying without really getting time to play, and then it's easy for Dupont to take, and then turn a great kick finding grass. Fullback Cages admits defeat and books for done. If France just accept this, it's a 30-metre net gain on where they first kicked. But wanting more, Untermatt plays quickly. Jaminet hits it long, but the extra second to go for touch the moment they're on the back foot and the duel buys them means they'll covered where they did earlier. Someone crucially, England shifted Marcus Smith